That's my reaction to the film Midsommar. Uh, as you can see by the title of this video, I was not a fan of this film. So, before I sink my teeth into this movie, I want to make this 100% and crystal clear. If you like this film, if you love this movie, if you thought that this was a great film, one of your favorite films for 2019, or just one of your favorite films of all time, I really don't have an issue with that. I think that's great. Different opinions are what keeps this world an interesting place. That being said, I definitely agree to disagree in this particular instance, because as much as I was not a fan of Ari Aster's previous film, Hereditary, that's a masterpiece compared to this movie. Because that film had more going for it. This is the cinematic equivalent of a pretty postcard from Sweden. It looks pretty. It's a nice image, but that's it. It's about as paper thin as a postcard too, if you ask me. Yeah. So, without further ado and without further stalling, let's just get right into it. So, it's directed by Ari Aster, and much like Hereditary, the direction in The Midsommar is not a problem. He's a capable director when it comes to visuals. I think he does a really remarkable job in terms of getting the most out of his locations, his settings, creating a mood and an atmosphere. He's really an excellent director when it comes to that. I mean, he's also a really creative director in terms of his techniques. There's a really cool shot in this film where the camera turns completely upside down. So there's a lot of interesting intricacies with his particular directing. And I want to make that profoundly clear, because I don't think he's a bad director. I don't think he's the greatest director in the world. I think some of the claims that he's like one of the best directors ever is a bit much, since his sample size is so small. But that being said, this is definitely a director who's talented. That's what makes these films so frustrating for me to watch, because there's potential. The director clearly knows his way around a camera, and he winds up lacking in my opinion, the two most important categories in a film when it comes to a compelling, engaging story, and equally as compelling and charismatic characters. Ari Aster, to me, is an absolutely awful writer when it comes to writing characters. He seems to just write characters either as complete caricatures, cliches, or he'll just have certain characters who might as well just be pieces of cardboard with emotions written on them in a Sharpie. Because really, that's all those characters tend to be. They're just placeholders for emotions with not much depth. So I personally don't think Ari Aster can write characters that are charismatic, likable, or engaging to save his life. I mean, even characters in Hereditary that had potential, his writing found another way to make them not likable or dull or boring. And Midsommar is no exception. There isn't a single character in this film that I cared about, that I was engaged with, that I liked. His attempts at trying to write humor were also incredibly cringe-inducing. There's a character in this who is played by the actor Will Poulter, and he's supposed to be the comedy relief. And it was a relief when he was off the screen because his comedy was so bad. So yeah, Ari Aster, to me, he needs to stop writing his own movies. I really think either he has another writer who lends their views and their expertise to it, or he just stops writing them altogether and focuses on the directing. I don't feel that he's a visionary when it comes to writing. Not one bit. I've seen both of his films. The subtext that he mentioned that he has in both of these movies is nothing spectacular, and he's pretty bad when it comes to creating a story that is consistently engaging. Midsommar is a prime example of this. The pacing in this film is so fucking slow. It moves at a glacial pace, and it doesn't help either that there are no characters that I personally got engaged with. And see, that's the thing. His films rely upon you actually caring about these characters, or at least one of them, or the main character. And if you don't give a shit about any of them, they're incredibly hard to watch because they're incredibly slow paced. And slow pacing in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when it's too slow paced, that's the problem. So yeah, they're incredibly slow paced, and it's just one of those things that it's a slow burn, but it never really goes anywhere. It's like an arsonist who lights a fire, but then it never really ignites, and it just feels like a exercise in punishment for the viewer, at least for me personally, because his films are also pretty long. This film was excruciating to sit through at times because it was just so fucking boring. And the horror elements weren't that effective. More often than not, I found them to be laughable or overwrought. There was like maybe a couple scenes that were a little bit creepy, but that's really about it for me. I don't know how anyone can watch the 3 hour long director's cut, but you know, to each their own. I mean, if that's something you're looking forward to and that's something you like, cool. But I mean, this movie doesn't even make it past an hour without testing your patience, let alone 2 hours or three. I mean, it's one of those films that it doesn't even need to be as long as it is. There are so many scenes in this film that are just dialogue that could have easily just been cut out of the film, in my opinion, and really would not have hurt the film one bit. But yeah, the Ari Aster's writing is a serious work in progress. But if everyone's just gonna glad hand him or suck his dick, then he's not gonna ever improve as a writer, because it seems like everyone and their mother, at least that I've come across, seems to do just that. They think he's a visionary double threat as a writer and a director, and I don't get it at all. I really don't. Even if you like this movie, are these characters likable? Are these characters particularly memorable? Please sound off in the comments down below if you feel that way, and give me a reason why. Because I've seen some people say, oh, they relate to Danny because they've dealt with some of the similar issues in their lives. Okay, all right, cool. But past that point, what is it about that character that sticks with you, or is engaging, or memorable? So, speaking of the screenplay, the overall concept here of a group of college-age students going to Sweden to take part in this midsummer ritual is not necessarily a bad concept. It's kind of an interesting idea. It's where the execution lies where the problem is. That's where the problem is with this movie, is that there are some good ideas and some good concepts. It's a really great looking film. Ari Aster's direction is gorgeous. The cinematography by Paweł Pogorzelski. I probably butchered his last name, but I thought the cinematography in this film was also absolutely amazing. It's a great looking film. The idea of having a horror film that has more of a light cinematography instead of a dark cinematography is an intriguing concept. But when you see it in action, you really know why horror films tend to lean more towards the darker cinematography. because that's just a more suitable mood and atmosphere. Everything just seems too bright in this movie, to the point where there's just so much brightness and so much light everywhere and sun and bright colors that it just saps away all of the uh, potential mood and atmosphere, and it becomes incredibly dull after a while because it just gets old super quickly. And I just feel that this script by Ari Aster, it starts off with a bang, spoiler, with Danny's sister having a breakdown, killing herself from carbon monoxide poisoning and the rest of her family. And that's a really intense way to open your film. But then the next 40-something minutes are really irritating back and forth dialogue, moments where they're trying to establish the character of Christian Hughes, her Danny's boyfriend, played by Jack Rayner. They're trying to establish him as this bad guy, and the film fails miserably at doing that. Because as the film continues to unfold, you feel more and more for Christian and less for Danny. At least for me personally. Because what ultimately happens to him, it's a punishment that doesn't really justify, the means, so to speak. It's one of those things where he gets punished and gets killed in a pretty horrific way. I guess not too horrific because he was paralyzed when he was burned, but still, he gets killed, and it's all for something that doesn't even really seem like a big enough deal in the long run that would lead to him being murdered. It's just one of those things that it just doesn't seem like he deserved it. And because even the infidelity that happens isn't entirely his fault. He's drugged up and coerced to do it against his will in a lot of ways, because it's not like he was completely sober when he was doing that. And so the whole message of empowerment and all this other stuff falls really flat because you don't buy into this argument that the film was trying to make, that Christian is this distant, bad boyfriend who wasn't there for her, and so on and so forth. If anything, the film kind of shows Danny's being a bit too clingy and a bit too emotional. And you side with Christian's friends when they're like, hey, you've done a lot of it, almost everything you can for this girl, man. Like, it's time to let her go. And if you think about it, it probably would have been the best option for both of them to break up. But then the tragedy happens, and then he stays with her because he's actually a good person. He realizes how much of a shitty thing that would be to break up with her right directly after such a tragic event and a moment of loss in her life. But after that, after, she gets over it or is feeling a little bit better, that's the moment when you just cut ties. And if something happens and she goes back into a depression or whatever, you know what? It sucks, but it's not worth staying in a relationship that's dead just because you feel guilty. Just rip the Band-Aid off and get it over with. That's just my personal view of things. So the film doesn't do a good job at all of trying to establish this character of Christian as this bad guy. It doesn't do a good job establishing Florence Pugh's character, Danny, as, this innocent girl who's just damaged because of this emotional trauma in her life. Because it doesn't seem like she does a lot to try to better herself. There's no reference of her going to therapy. There's no reference of her trying to do anything other than wallow around in her grief. And I guess this particular trip is supposed to simulate a therapy of some kind, but it doesn't seem like it does her any good because it's not her thinking on her own accord. It's her thinking and doing these things while being high as a fucking kite. So it's... I don't really... Even the subtext and even the message of this film is muddled to me. Like, what is it really trying to say? And I've noticed this too with Ari Aster's films that I've seen. It seems like these movies are therapy. Are they therapy for Ari? If they're therapy for Ari, here's some advice. Instead of using your films as therapy and the audience as therapy, go to a fucking therapist. If you got some issues and need to work them out with a therapist, not with your screenplays. Just some advice. Because both his films have to deal with grief and loss. What happened, Ari? What happened, man? Let's hash it out with your therapist. That'll be a more healthy way for you to deal with this than to do a screenplay. Because honestly, at this point, the themes are the same. It's just the setting that's different. Is he just going to be the grief and loss dramatic horror director? Is that all his shtick is going to be? Because at this point, it's already gotten old and stale for me personally. I know it hasn't for other people, but it's already gotten stale for me. So, for like an hour and 5 minutes, nothing of circumstance happens in the story except for the suicide. And speaking of the suicide, I want to reference one thing about Ari Aster's style that really irritates me, that I'm not a fan of at all, and it's extreme emotions. And this is a poster child for Ari Aster's, honestly, kind of an obsession with extreme emotions. Just like in Hereditary, this film relies not only upon you engaging with the characters for it to succeed, but it also relies upon you being unnerved or uncomfortable or uneasy with how he portrays emotions. But for me personally, how he portrays emotions are so over the top and so in your face and so on the nose that it doesn't make me uneasy. It just annoys me. So when you have a scene where it's trying to establish some kind of mood and atmosphere that's of dread, where there's a scene in the film where it's the camera's panning around in the garage and eventually going to reveal what happened to Danny's sister and her family. And it's a well-shot sequence. But then you have a score in the background that sounds like a car horn blaring. It's just going... And so I'm thinking that, oh, she passed out, carbon monoxide poisoning, killed herself. She's passed out, the car horn is blaring. No, that's not what happened at all. It's the score that sounds similar to a car horn blaring, and that's just really obnoxious. And then after that, Danny's dealing with her own grief and the loss, and I get it. But the director decides to, without any music, without any cuts, without any edits, has a long, drawn-out scene of Danny sitting on her boyfriend's lap, crying like a foghorn. And it's just like, that's not unnerving to me. It's annoying. And then there's other scenes like this in the film that try to continue this kind of choice by the filmmaker, Ari Aster, to try to break you out of your comfort zone. And all it does is irritate the fuck out of me. There's a scene where there's an orgy or whatever, and all the women, they sound like horny seals. They're just going, You're just like, Jesus fucking Christ, Ari. And then he has a scene later where it combines horny seals with ugly crying, and it is, I swear to God, Ari Aster did this to create the most annoying series of sounds ever heard on film. Like, this shit makes the most annoying noise in the world by Jim Carrey, his character in Dumb and Dumber. It makes that sound absolutely pleasurable in comparison. Because you got horny seals, and then you got, and you're just like, oh my God, this fucking movie. So really, I don't get it. It's not scary. It's not unnerving. It's not upsetting. It's annoying. If his goal was to annoy the ever-loving shit out of me with this movie, then I would say he succeeded. He definitely succeeded. But that's not his goal. Ari Aster is trying to unnerve you. He's trying to make you upset. He's trying to make you sick to your stomach. He's trying to break you out of your comfort zone. And he's trying to do it with these extreme exaggerations of emotions, and it doesn't work for me. So if it works for you, then you can be like, oh, this is amazing. It makes me feel all these emotions, all these feelings that I've never felt before. He does such a good job at it making me uneasy. But it just annoys me. So yeah, that was one of my least favorite things about this movie, other than the unlikable characters and the glacial pacing, is this annoying extreme emotions. I mean, there's even other scenes where Danny, she just all out of nowhere, she'll just be like, and you're just like, I don't want to watch 2 hours of ugly crying. I'm sorry. Who wants to watch 2 hours of ugly crying and horny seals and annoying Swedish chants where they sound like they have a frog stuck in their throat? So we got a suicide in the first hour and 5 minutes, and then finally something happens, but when it happens, it's just one of those, like, really? So there's 2 old people who jump off a cliff. As part of the ritual in the commune is when people get too old, they off themselves. Which apparently is based on some old urban legend in I think Swedish or Viking culture, but it's an urban legend. It actually was never confirmed that there really was such a thing. And I'll give Ari this. He definitely puts his research into these type of movies. But that only goes so far. Authenticity in this kind of movie is like, okay, good, nice job. I'll give you a cookie, but that doesn't make the film great. It doesn't make it good by default that you did research. Wow, here's a gold star. Thank you. Can you create likable, engaging characters? Can you not rely upon extreme emotions to the point where it just makes your film laughable and annoying? So that's just my personal view of things, just my advice. But I mean, so yeah, these old people, they off themselves, and then continuing with Ari Aster's, in my opinion, overrated writing skills, he writes these characters in a way that just doesn't make any sense. Except for like 2 characters. There's 2 characters in this film that all of a sudden are like, yeah, that's fucked up. Because not only did these old people jump off a cliff, one of them wasn't dead right away. So then one of the commune members takes out a giant mallet and smashes his head in like a watermelon at a Gallagher concert. And only two people react the way that they should. The others react like fucking sociopaths who are all like a little bit freaked out but still watch intently. And then a couple, what seems like only hours later, you have a scene where two of the characters, after they literally saw two people jump off a cliff in an attempt to kill themselves, and one of them got their head smashed in with a mallet like a fucking watermelon. You have these two guys debating about their fucking what is it, their thesis statement or some shit. They're debating about, their theses, because their whole point of them going to this commune in Sweden is for their thesis for college. So these two characters, they briefly mentioned, they said like, that was fucked up, yeah it was, but you know, I'm gonna do my thesis on the commune's rituals. Bro, that was my idea! How dare you! I was gonna do my thesis on the commune's rituals! And like, that's the fucking scene in a nutshell. Right after these two guys have seen something horrific that should really make them like think about getting the fuck out of there, they go back to their little beds, their little hotel in the commune, essentially, and are like arguing about their thesis statements. And so then the two people who have a clue, they decide to leave, they get killed off screen, because Ari Aster can't even deliver you the goods when it comes to that. One of them, you see the aftermath, and it's actually pretty creepy. Gets splayed out like an, I think it's like, it's kind of a ritual sort of thing. It's like an eagle. It's a blood eagle. And so that was a pretty good practical effect. Pretty creepy looking scene. I'll give the film credit for that. Doesn't mean I liked the film. Doesn't mean I thought it was a good movie just for that one scene that was a little creepy. Then you have what feels like another 2 hours of like nothing that I give a flying fuck about. They can't. One of the bad comic relief, Will Poulter, Mark, he pees on a sacred tree, pisses off the commune members. He gets killed by one of the commune members who's wearing, well actually that he gets killed off screen, because of course. And then his face gets torn off screen, and one of the commune members puts it on to kill the other guy. So now it's just Danny and Christian who are left alive. I guess the whole point of this is some sacrifice ceremony where they will get volunteers from the commune to sacrifice themselves alongside these new people, these outsiders. And that leads to the orgy scene where before that they were having a dinner, Danny and Christian and the commune members, and it's insinuated some kind of mushroom drug or something that makes them completely trip out, because they're seeing like images starting to wave in and out and things are getting all trippy. It's a decent looking effect on the film's part, but I've seen drug trips in films before. It's nothing new. So then they get to the annoying, horrendously hard to watch orgy scene mixed in with the ugly crying, the cavalcade of crying. And then the movie ends with the commune members lighting the Triforce building on fire, because that's really what it is. It's a triangle. It's a little pyramid with, it's yellow. Might as well be the fucking Triforce from Legend of Zelda. So they get in the Triforce building. A Christian was drugged up and he was put in a bear suit. which reminds me of Nicolas Cage in the Wicker Man remake when he's in the bear suit punching people. And then I was just like, why can't he be in this movie? This movie would be a million times better if Nicolas Cage showed up in the bear suit and just started punching these Swedish commune members in the face. I'm like, this movie's awesome. This movie really picked up. I can see why critics like this movie now. Nicolas Cage shows up in a bear suit and just fucking wrecks people. No, that's not what happens at all. And speaking of the Wicker Man, this movie, in a lot of ways, just rips off the Wicker Man. I'm not talking about the remake, I'm talking about the original Wicker Man. And I mean, even the ending is somewhat similar because it's another thing where you have somebody who supposedly betrayed another person. They get put into a building or a structure of sort and lit on fire. And, of course, you know, gotta keep the uncomfortable, weird emotions going because that's Ari Aster, one of Ari Aster's MO. One of his MOs. So you have this really laughably overwrought scene when the fire is lit. Donnie, she won the maypole tournament or competition or whatever, so she's considered to be the, you know, the maypole queen. And she's got this elaborate flower headdress. And then by the end of the movie, she's wearing literally a dress made out of flowers. And she can't even really move around in it. So she's just shuffling her feet in this dress of flowers. And it looks like this actress, Florence Pugh, literally trips over her own feet in a couple shots. And Ari just left it in there. It looks like a blooper reel. Just like, whoops! Whoa! And then the last shot of the movie, it's just her looking at the camera with her sad face, which is, like I said, that's really honestly my reaction to the movie. So she has her sad face, and then she goes slowly from sad to happy. And that's the fucking, that's the end of the movie. It's just her sad face, and then she smiles. And what's the significance of that? She's happy now that her boyfriend that she apparently didn't like, although he did almost everything he could for her and then some, and really would have been justified in leaving her ass before this whole fucking debacle. She's happy he's gone. She's independent now. She's over her grief. What? And it's not like she is really all there at this moment. She's probably high on shrooms and God knows what else. Oh my god, fuck this movie. So, I had to go into spoilers here because that's the best way for me to just really get the shit out of my basement when it comes to this movie. So that's Midsommar. And speaking of, I almost said Hereditary. I might as well mention it. I've said it before in this video. I'll say it again. I don't like Hereditary, but that's a much better movie than this. Much better film. It has a score by Bobby Krylik, or I'm probably saying his name wrong. It's the same kind of music that Ari Aster likes to have, where it's just there to try to create mood and atmosphere, but it's incredibly transparent. There's really nothing to it. It's not something you want to listen to in your spare time, and it's so transparent and obvious that it does the opposite of creating mood and atmosphere to me. It's like the car horn score and some of the other stuff. It's just like, it's just background noise. Eventually just tune it out. Edited by Lucian Johnston. Yeah, I guess the editing is okay. I mean, I think this film could have had multiple scenes cut out of it to improve the pacing. But you know, I would say the editing isn't particularly egregious. I think the pacing is more of a screenplay problem than the editor being to blame. The performances, Florence Pugh, she's doing the best she can with what she has to work with and what she is asked to do. I think Ari Aster purposely asked her to be extreme with her emotions in multiple scenes as if she's in a silent film. And I don't think that works, but to each their own. I'm not going to blame her for what she was asked to do. She did a good job with the type of role that she was asked to play. Jack Rayner, I don't really remember anything about him, about his performance, about his character, other than they tried to paint him out as this bad guy, and the more the film unfolded, the more I started to feel for the guy. I mean, even early on, there's an argument that he has with Danny, where he didn't tell her that he did decide to go to the Sweden trip, and gets an argument with him. He sees right through her and knows that she's upset that he didn't tell her. He says he's sorry, but then gets all pissed at him because that sorry sounded more like a yeah right, and then he's like, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to sound like that. And then she still gets pissed off at him, and he's like, what is this about? And she's like, I'm not mad at you for, how you said I'm sorry. I'm mad at you. I'm not even mad at you at all. It's just like, oh my God. If they're just trying to write Danny as some stereotypical, confused movie girlfriend who has arguments that not even Einstein could figure out, because that's honestly what it feels like and what it seems like when you watch this movie. So I mean, I'd say the performances were really bad. I mean, William Jackson Harper as Josh, Willem Blomgren as Pele, Will Poulter as Mark. His, I will say, is bad though, because his line delivery was awful. It was atrocious. His comedy was egregious. It was really so hard to watch because he's just bombing. It's one of those things where when someone is bombing on stage, usually they just get quickly taken off the stage. There's like a hook that comes in and pulls them off screen. That doesn't happen with him. He's just bombing continually over and over again. And then eventually he gets killed off screen. But by that point, it's already too late. Because the impression that you've gotten from this character, Mark, is that he's this terrible comedian who should have died 30 minutes into the movie. And yeah, that's the problem. When you have your characters that are either so bland and uninteresting that you don't care, or so unlikable that you don't care. So there's no suspense, there's no intrigue, there's no thrills, there's no scares, there's no anything. You don't feel anything when these characters die or when they're in danger, and that leads to an incredibly dull, slow-paced, glacial film because these characters don't engage you as an audience. And Ari Aster is awful at doing that. He's awful at creating engaging characters and a story that is engaging consistently. His stories can be engaging in fits and spurts, but not consistently. From my personal experience and from my personal view. Doesn't have to be yours. But yeah, I mean, at worst, other than Will Poulter, the performances were mediocre. They were average. They were adequate. But that's putting into consideration what they had to work with, which in my opinion wasn't a whole lot. This script, in my opinion, needed more polish. It needed another writer or two. This felt like a film that might have been a little bit rushed on Ari Aster's part because of the surprise success of Hereditary. So he wanted to get in on that Hereditary money or continue that momentum. So we just kind of rushed through this film. It's kind of how I view Us, Jordan Peele's follow up to Get Out. It's another film that felt a little rushed in terms of its narrative, in terms of other elements of the story. And I feel that way about Midsommar. I know he's tried to explain things about the movie. He's tried to say like, oh well, it's not actually a horror film. It's a dark comedy. And I'm just like, are you trolling people, Ari, at this point? Are you actually trying to say that this movie is a dark comedy about a breakup? Because if that's what you're trying to say about this film, I don't see it. I don't see it at all. And if you think this is funny, or deliberately funny, like I laughed at a couple scenes, but that's because of just how overwrought and over the top they were, the extreme emotions and so on and so forth. But if that was meant to be intentional, it didn't come across that way, and it's not a very funny comedy. So if you're trying to make a comedy, you failed. If you're trying to make a horror film that's scary, you failed. And, you know, so I guess you failed on both merits, on both levels. If it's supposed to be a comedy. Anyway, I've said enough about it. This is a long video. I apologize. But this is one of those movies where I just felt like I just had to say whatever it was off the top of my head in regards to this movie so I could just be done with it. But anyway, I really don't know what else to say about the film, except if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I would give the movie 1.5 out of 5. That might be a little generous, but that's honestly how I feel about it. Most of it's for the cinematography, for the direction, for the visuals, a couple sequences that kind of creep me out a little bit, and, you know, some of the performances at some moments in the film. But that's really about it for me. I was not a fan of this film. It would definitely be on my worst list of 2019 if I made a video on it or I put a list together. And I don't get the seemingly overwhelming amount of praise for this. I didn't get it for Hereditary, and I definitely do not get it for this movie. But hey, if you love the movie, more power to you. I think that's great. I would say, if you were interested in this movie and the trailer intrigued you, or you heard a lot of good things about it, so you wanted to check it out for yourself, I would still recommend you do that, because this is just my opinion of the film. It doesn't have to be yours. Your opinion could be vastly different. But, you know, if you were on the fence about this movie for a lot of the same reasons that I was, I personally think this would be a waste of your time. I would definitely recommend you skip this, because this is like over 2 hours of your life you will never get back, and you will wish that you did something more productive with your time than sit through this really tedious film. So, anyway, thank you for watching my rant on Midsommar, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.